Race relations is a huge topic in America today. Massive riots such as those in Ferguson and most recently Baltimore have captivated the media and our daily conversations. However, many do not know that these outbursts of violence are nothing new to our country. As far back as the Great Depression, people have aggressively fought against unjust treatment from their own leaders.
Since the Harlem Riots of 1935, civil rights riots have taken a new form in America. The property damage and violence of March 19th after Lino Rivera's rumored beating and death made the Harlem Race Riots the first modern race riot. The riots that followed were typically sparked by the same issues that rocked Harlem: economic inequality and police brutality.
In the late summer of 1967, the Detroit police raided an illegal night bar called Blind Pig. This bar was heavily populated by African Americans, and most were arrested for just being there. This fueled the anger of many African Americans, leading to buildings set on fire, lootings, gunfights, and knife fights. The riot did not end until federal troops came into Detroit and stopped it, leaving the city with 43 deaths as well as severe decline in the economy. Although there were many indirect causes of this riot, the number one underlying cause was police brutality. Dating back to 1943, African Americans of Detroit were constantly fueled to rebel against the treatment of the police towards them. The police constantly outwardly harassed African Americans, leaving the city with racially unequal morals. Looking at the immediate catalyst, it seems as though the riot was uncalled for. However, Detroiters had years of built-up frustration to justify their actions. At the time of the riot, the unemployment rate of African Americans was 15.9%, reaching a new high. Affordable housing was difficult to find, which was the second most important issue leading up to the riot. African Americans were forced to live in the poorest parts of town in small, broken buildings. Unlike the 1943 riot, the 1967 Detroit riot had more effective aftermath. After the federal troops ended the riot, city officials founded the New Detroit Committee, which sought to solve problems that occurred in the riot. Hope was also created to ensure a more harmonious atmosphere in Detroit. Almost immediately after the riot, the first African American governor was elected, and each governor since then has been African American. In the late 60s, the civil rights movement swept the country. The movement was made possible by the earlier 14th Amendment, which gave the Black community a stronger political presence. With strong leadership from individuals like Martin Luther King Jr., the movement resulted in several pieces of legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act, that symbolized great hope for African Americans. However, the coming riots would show that the laws that were passed did not bring full racial equality to America.
On August 26, 1970, thousands of women marched in the streets of major cities as part of a demonstration for women's rights. The strike was led by National Organization for Women, also called NOW, directed by Betty Friedan. The strike was in honor of the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Friedan understood that even though the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote, they still didn't have equality with men. Abortion rights, child care rights, and equal pay and job opportunities were the stated goals of the strike. President Nixon acknowledged the credibility of the movement and declared August 26th as Women's Rights Day. However, not much changed with the actual rights of women, just that it sparked the second wave of feminism. Before this strike, the Equal Pay Act of 1963 provided the basis for equality between men and women's wages. However, there were so many loopholes that it wasn't effective in closing the gap. Instead of angry mobs, women held peaceful demonstrations on the streets and in parks. On the other hand, similarities between the two are basic economic and human rights inequalities. Unlike race riots, women's rights strikes like this were not violent. They were scheduled events and police didn't have to get involved. Race riots often had deaths, injuries, fires, and millions of dollars in damages. The Paycheck Fairness Act is an amendment of the 1963 Equal Pay Act and contains practical steps to promote fair pay for women. The bill has been rejected by Congress 5 times since its original introduction in 2009, despite its continued support by President Obama's Democratic congressmen. Currently, in more than 60% of American families, women are the primary or co-income producer, making it even more urgent to address the fact that women make 77 cents for every dollar that men make. A serious pay gap exists, and it is hurting over half of women and their families.
On April 29, 1992, 3 LAPD officers were acquitted in the beating of unarmed black motorist Rodney King. A year earlier, King had led the officers on a high-speed chase through LA County, which ended in his arrest. A video was captured which showed the officers beating King relentlessly, even after he was clearly no longer able to resist arrest. The video fueled a nationwide debate over race relations and police brutality. The majority of the public agreed that the police had gone too far, but despite this fact, the jurors did not believe that they could prosecute the men solely from the short video. 2 hours after the decision, police were called to the first report of rioting. 5 hours later, a local state of emergency was called, and Governor Pete Wilson approved the activation of 2,000 National Guard Reserve soldiers. Schools and workplaces did not open up again until May 4th. The riots had gone on for 5 days and had caused over $1 billion in property damage, 7,000 arrests, 2,000 injuries, and 55 deaths. Though the LA riots had been some of the most violent race riots in American history, its causes were similar to almost every other: police brutality and economic inequality. According to the LA Times, quote, "The district attorney's office declined to prosecute at least 278 police officers and sheriff's deputies accused of assaulting civilians with fists, clubs, flashlights, leather-covered steel saps, pistol barrels, scalding water, and an electric stun gun," end quote, from 1980 to 1991. Not only was police brutality a huge issue in LA County, it was one that was almost completely ignored. Between 1991 and 1992, over 100,000 jobs were lost. 30% of the Black and Latino communities lived in poverty, and their unemployment was at 13%. The county's average unemployment rate was about 8 to 9%. The problems that were made clear in Harlem and every other race riot had not shown any signs of disappearing, even almost 60 years after the first modern riot.
Almost a decade after the LA riots, a boy by the name of Timothy Thomas, a 19-year-old unarmed African American, was shot by a white police officer in 2001. Thomas was the 15th African American man to be murdered by an officer since 1996. Thomas's prior encounters with the police officers have raised numerous issues in racial profiling. Between February 2000 and April 2001, Thomas has been repeatedly cited for traffic violations, mostly for not wearing a seatbelt and driving without a license. However, many stated that a close surveillance is required in order to notice someone not wearing a seatbelt. In about a 2-month period, he was stopped on 11 occasions. In 2001 and 2002, violent crimes and property crime rates rose in the city, with property crime rates peaking at 2003. 63 rioters were indicted on felony charges. After a year, the community boycott was estimated to have caused a $10 million negative economic impact on the city. Police behavior and protocols were investigated, and changes were made to improve training and interaction with the community. An article in the USA Today noted positive developments. On April 13, 2001, the mayor of Cincinnati, Charles J. Lugan, issued a citywide curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. for all but the worker travelers, which led to the end in riots. He also declared a state emergency and brought 125 Ohio State Highway Patrol troopers to assist with all the policing. In all, 800 people were arrested for violating curfew conditions. 13 years after the Cincinnati riots, on August 9, 2014, an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, was fatally shot by white police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, setting off protests and months of unrest in the community. When the case finally went on trial, the grand jury made the decision not to charge Wilson, which led out a second round of rioting.
Ferguson is a city made up of 67% African Americans, yet they are 86% of those stopped by the police. Black drivers are 93% of those arrested in Ferguson, despite the fact that white drivers are more likely to possess contraband based on the percentage of those searched who have illegal goods. Throughout the years, Cincinnati has put up with multiple recovery tactics, and for Ferguson there are many lessons to be learned. According to the Wall Street Journal, the author lists 5 lessons. Tell the public everything immediately, set the record straight, don't crucify the cops. The federal government can slow the healing and reject race baiters. So where do we go now? Clearly, tensions are still high despite countless political movements and the strong desire for change. Though America's racial bias is not as strong as it was during the years of segregation, it is still very real and must be recognized. Continued peaceful protests could gather media attention and broadcast the need for equality. Also, police brutality could be lessened by the addition of body cameras on officers. Affirmative action programs work to close the income gap between races. There are 1,000 possible solutions, but no matter which one is chosen, the country must work together as a whole to achieve it.